Everybody see this? Did you try shooting this on the curtains to see if it was?
No, I did not. You want to try turning it and see?
I would.
Oh.
Yeah.
Don't forget that idea. All right, well, just crane your heads, do whatever you have to.
Catherine will enjoy your presentation today.
You will need to pretend a little to enjoy this speech, like that you can see the slides. Last week, for those of you that were here, you heard Jim tell us just how easy it is to launch a new company. And I spoke about lean startups and explained how you can reduce the risk and be more likely to succeed. And I'm sure you've all been out getting your lean startup off the ground, and you're now facing some tough technical challenges. And as software engineers, of course, the startup you're bringing to market is going to necessarily, these days, involve a cloud component to it. Almost, so the conference I'm speaking to next week, they're going to be software engineers, and you're playing the part. So as someone facing that technical challenge of where to host, you have a set of options available to you. You can host it yourself. You can use something called infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. And I'm going to try to give you a little bit of background on these different choices. But first, let me make it simple for you. If you use self-hosting, that's essentially what your grandparents would have done. So just to boil it down, infrastructure as a service, probably what your father would have done. Or platform as a service, that's what all the cool kids are doing. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So I know we're not all on the same level with regards to cloud technology, and so I'm going to introduce some of the topics and help you understand these options to the extent that it impacts your decisions and helps you make the right choice. I'm not going to spend any time on self-hosting because you just have to be crazy to go do it these days, but rather let's first talk about infrastructure as a service. And many of you have heard of Amazon and their EC2 and Amazon Web Services probably. And that's an example of infrastructure as a service. It's essentially virtualization in the cloud. The idea that you take a server and you share it amongst a bunch of people that sort of lease or rent these services online, and they do a certain amount for you. They provide a lot of the infrastructure, and you manage the upper portion of it. But so you get a lot over the alternative that your grandparents would have used of self-hosting. You don't have to manage the physical infrastructure, but you do still have to manage the operating system and the maintenance of the operating system, for example, patches and so forth. So not a bad option, but the point is there's better options. Platform as a service. Platform as a service is, again, if you can just see the orange area is the part that they manage for you, and you're left with only managing the cloud service, which you create, and the data that, of course, gets provided as people start using your application. So you get a lot more. You give up some control, but you get the company, for example, Microsoft provides something called Azure, probably a brand name many of you have heard, or not. But they provide the database and the runtime and the middleware. For example, the web server, maybe some of you are familiar with EJBs and Java services, so that would be an example of runtime. The database, so they're providing for you out of the box something like SQL Server already configured for you, or maybe if you're using a non-SQL database, something like MongoDB, already prepared for you, so you literally just bring your code to it and plug it in and go. Very little requirements on your time. And so that, one other term you've undoubtedly heard is software as a service, and really there's ways that comes into the picture, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But in that case, you're literally just signing up for a service. Many of you have heard of Salesforce.com. That's an example of software as a service. You just bring your data in that case. You don't even have to write any code. So further explaining platform as a service, and what I'm building towards here is helping you understand as a lean startup why this is the right choice for you. So in addition to what we saw in this last slide, where you're just bringing your data in your cloud service and they're providing all this infrastructure, they're also providing other things for you. For example, elastic scaling and load balancing. You don't have to configure that. If any of you had to configure a database server to play in a cluster and be highly available, it's not something that you want to be doing as you're starting a company. You may be all smart and all very experienced with it, but as we spoke last time about lean startup, you need to focus on developing your customers and not the infrastructure or the technology. Similarly, as you go down the stack, they're providing, again, everything but the application. The web server, the operating system, cluster database, load balancing, all of that's there. You simply upload, import your code, and off it goes. It's highly available. So things like automated scaling are really, really hard for a startup to provide without a lot of funding, and most of you aren't going to get that opportunity. There's lots of options now too. So platform as a service is not just one thing. It's spreading out, it's maturing, and there's so many different options. It's almost like Baskin Robbins. You got 31 flavors to pick from. So one of the key ones to focus on though is application platform as a service. And especially for a lean startup, that's critical to know about, because it may well be that you don't have to write any code even to get your lean startup going. So last time we talked about a minimum viable product. It may well be possible to create a minimum viable product in an application platform as a service environment with absolutely no coding and get it in front of customers tomorrow rather than weeks from now. And so examples would be using Force.com, which underlies Salesforce. You can actually define an application out there with just kind of pointing and clicking and no actual coding. And there's another great example is from Intuit. It's called QuickBase. And you're all going to hear a lot more about this as time goes by. So again, it's all about the combination. Last time we talked about lean startups and all the advantages of following that methodology. And here it's about the technology, platform as a service, and how the combination allows you to do the lean startup methodology more successfully. It allows you to do these quick experiments. We talked about last time that OODA loop and how it's the person that can iterate through that loop the fastest that's going to win. And so with platform as a service, you're not focused on having to reset up a server. If the server's not configured right, you wipe it out, and you hit a button, and you have a new server, and you push your software out there, and there you go. Almost no time expended. I mentioned the application platform as a service. That allows you to take that concierge approach that you can learn about in the Lean Startup book. So basically, you fake it out. You make it look like you have an application, maybe. You get people to start signing up, and you kind of build it as they come. Again, focus on the customer is key. Instead of focusing on the infrastructure and the technology, you're focusing on developing customers, not the infrastructure. And there's a key concept out there now called DevOps. Has anybody heard this term, DevOps? Okay, this is very critical to understand. It's kind of the meshing of the developers and the operations staff. Typically in the past, these have been very distinct groups, and they didn't always get along, and the communication between them was often rough. And now it turns out that this is, because of the nature and the speed at which this is happening and the ease at which it can happen, and the fact that platform as a service, you can deploy all this software programmatically. You don't need a human doing the deployment. It's using APIs to do it. So DevOps, there's actual tools, software tools, like Chef and Puppet and a few others that help automate the operations portion of this. And it's very key to think about using those tools from day one so that you can make those experiments quickly. You build your software, you push a button, it's deployed. Platform as a service, very highly available. If you do it yourself, it will not, we can almost guarantee it will not be that highly available. Again, the cost factors alone. You can't afford to create a cluster database server on your own. You just can't. You can't match what they can offer. So if a VC is looking, you've promoted your product, you've spent days getting ready, you've advertised it to someone who might be an investor, and then they log in and, oops, sorry, it's down. You don't want that to happen, obviously. And if you do it yourself, odds are it will be. But with platform as a service, most of these services are providing like 5 nines now of availability. They only advertise about 3 nines, but they're coming closer to 5. There's no way a small startup can accomplish that. Elasticity, so finally you hit it big. You got mentioned on Good Morning America or whatever it is, and everybody all of a sudden is hitting your server. You want to make sure it's available and that you can scale dynamically. And these platform as a service environments will automatically allow you to do that just through configuration with little investment of time. And finally, using platform as a service and thinking about it from the start will help you architect for the cloud. Not that architecture is something you should be focused on as a startup, but if you are using a platform as a service, the end result will be more likely to lend itself to future growth and the needs that software has these days. It has to scale. People, you never know when you're going to hit it big. You want to be prepared, so you should architect from the cloud. And finally, I mentioned software as a service. So there's a way to use platform as a service and stitch together your solution from these different services. So for example, rather than thinking about writing your email relay or your payment services or your indexing service, all of this is available in environments like Azure. You simply sign up and use their APIs, stitch the thing together. There's no reason to code any of that these days, and it's amazing how quickly you can get your lean startup going and start, again, focusing on developing those customers and going through those quick cycles of iteration. And just to make a final point about all of this, the cost. So this is a real example from a startup, and on Microsoft Azure, using their Empower program, the first 2 years, you can easily pay nothing and get things going. And obviously, to all of you as people starting a company, the cost is critical initially. So in summary, as the chart here demonstrates, platform as a service is going to save you cost, time. It's going to require less skill. You all as software people are proud of your skills. The point is, you have to shift. You have to think differently now. You can no longer be software people. You're business people. You need to be focused on developing customers and not technology. Thank you.